Um, yeah, I'm going to talk about the collective ochlotecture. I've been practicing saying that. Isn't this a wonderful event, by the way? Just thought as an aside. Of large language models. And I've been working in what I guess we call collective intelligence for about 27 years, and I started building self-organizing systems with stigmergic, which kind of replaced a teacher with a crowd. And what I've learned is really that there's an awful lot of different ways of thinking about collective intelligence and what it means. And my own thinking has evolved significantly over the years. I mean, sometimes I've used it in the sort of civic intelligence sense of the word. Sometimes I've used it in the as an extended mind sense of the word. That's very much where I am now. I'm thinking about technological connectones and the ways in which we connect with one another through the technologies we use. So I think I want to try and start by trying to make some sense of this, and I coined this term, which I don't imagine is going to take on because it's really hard to pronounce, but ochlotecture, which I take from ochlos, meaning multitude or mob or crowd, and tektōn, meaning builder. It's thinking about the things that the processes, the structures, and the forms of a crowd, what makes a different kind of crowd. The last but one book was teaching crowds, and Terry Anderson and I tried to think about groups and networks, and we came up with sets, because sometimes it's not the network, it's the aggregate. It's the same as in flocking behavior, and all of the many different ways in which those things can blend and merge and intersect. And really, it didn't actually make all of that much sense. So the ochlotectural elements thing, it can be almost anything. It's the stuff that makes a collection of people work together in some way or not work together in some way. And I really like Doug Schuler's civic intelligence capacities framework, because pretty much everything in that, which I pasted in hastily just before speaking here, because pretty much everything in that is what I would describe as an ochlotectural element. Now, in terms of collective systems, I think there is a generic collective ochlotecture. Gosh, I'm making life hard for myself in talking. This stems from work that I published, first of all, I think in 2009, trying to think about the nature of these self-organizing collective systems. And in this case, I was very much thinking along the lines of stigmergic, swarming, social navigation type uses. And it struck me that there were really three major elements of this. The first is collecting what the crowd has done. The crowd does something. It creates something. It acts in some way. Maybe somebody is looking up on the street, and others start looking up, or Google collects a whole load of documents and apply and then there's a processing phase of that. In Google's case, the page rank algorithm and all of the other 200 odd things that it does. In the case of the crowd, it's thinking, oh, somebody is looking up, therefore I will look up because that's probably interesting. So this processing can happen as part of our cognition, our internal intrasomatic cognition, or it can happen through machine. And then there is some kind of presentation, and the presentation is often very important. This is especially true if you happen to be a termite. And then that goes back to the crowd. It affects the crowd changes, the crowd then does something different, which is then collected. And so it's this cyclical process that carries on pretty much forever and ever and ever. And that's what makes self-organizing crowds wise. Now, now thinking of this in terms of the large language models, and I am one of those who thinks that a large language model is something collective. It collects a huge amount of data. It does some processing on it. It presents it back. What's unusual about it is that the processing in the middle gets feedback from, gets a prompt or whatever from a human. And that means that every time it runs, it's using a different algorithm. You get emergent configurations of neural networks that actually, it's evolvability. The rules themselves change as you use the rules. And that feeds back into people, and that feeds back into the collecting and the processing. And of course, we now have large language models as being part of that crowd as well, which makes it hugely recursive and incredibly frightening. So education, I had two views of education. One is that it's a technology through which we learn to operate the technologies of our cultures and societies, be they how to write poetry or appreciate poetry, to how to take civic action. And another view is that it's how we form the identities, our attitudes, and our values, our ways of being, ways of seeing. Until now, automation in all forms has replaced the hard technique, the stuff where we have to play a correct role in the technology's orchestration. Now generative AIs, because they do all of that collective stuff, are able to replace our soft technique, the creative things that we do with it, the problem-solving things that we do with it. And that, I find, is a bit of a problem, because there is no they there. They have no identities. They can have every identity. It worries me because of collective model collapse. It's not just the model collapse in the AIs themselves, but we are the ones. We are part of that crowd, and they're affecting us, and that is bad news. Because if that is how we become collectively smart, it's not such a great plan. And it worries me that we will lose those soft techniques, those soft skills, the creative capacity. Now, I know we can be creative with generative AIs. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. But there is something, and Tim mentioned something in the chat earlier about, well, just because an AI can do it, should it do it? Or is it something we should stop doing? And no, I mean, for many things, our identities, our ways of being, our ways of seeing, and how we draw a picture kind of matters. So in terms of what it means for education, I think there are two aspects to this. The top of the screen, thinking about generative AIs as means of enabling connection, as a means of supporting connection, and they can play, there's a lot of really interesting research on having them play interesting roles in connecting people, in stimulating conversation, in summarizing conversations, and so on. They can be pretty powerful things. That's a good way, I think, a good way of using generative AI and thinking of them as partners rather than tools. Because when we think of them as tools, it's really easy to forget that we learn ways of being from our interactions with others, and we really don't want to learn our ways of being from something that is admittedly 99% human, because, as I say, it's collective intelligence. Nearly all of the generative AI is made by humans. It's what's worrisome is that they don't think in human ways, and they're not, and they've just got biases and really terrible things that we really don't want to have. And I think in terms of education, in terms of how we respond to that, is about embracing that second role of education, that role in forming identity, in forming values and attitudes and ways of thinking. We've spent a whole lot of time in a sort of McNamara world where the measurement has become the thing. And the stuff that we can measure is the easily measured objectivist stuff. And that becomes, so the learning outcomes are basically the only things that we care about, and the credentials that go along with them. Whereas the stuff that really matters, that's how we learn to be with one another in our societies. And it seems to me that we need to embrace that a great deal more, to think about education as a community, not as a product. And as part of that problem with the McNamara fallacy thing, the decoupling learning and credentials seems to me like a really, really good idea, because right now it's so driven by the type 1 education, the learn some skills, learn to be able to do things with technologies. that we're losing or run the risk of losing the thing that actually does matter about it, which is about education, very broadly construed, not just in institutions, of course, as being how we become parts of our society. And I think I just managed to get that into 10 minutes. How's that?
Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you, Jon. Any question from our lovely panel? Do I see hands up? Simon.
Okay, I'll just kick it off quickly. Jon, are you happy with the idea that a chatbot can cultivate the kinds of tacit skills and dispositions that you value so much?
Not even slightly. I really don't think that a chatbot can. The problem is it will. I mean, you're getting the tacit stuff when whether it's coming from a chatbot or a human being. What worries me is that we become less human and less. I mean, we become different. Let's not call us less human. We are essentially a technologically mediated species. So we become what we behold. You know, as McLuhan put it. We shape our tools. Our tools shape our lives, or yeah. So I think we should do that mindfully if we're going to do it at all. And personally, I don't think we should be doing that.
Okay, I think I disagree with you, but I'm going to pass on to the next person.
Excellent.
We can discuss that towards
Margaret, you lower your hand.
Just because I thought Simon was passing on to me. But I mean,
Did you have a question?
Yeah, my question is around this the tacit skills, and also, you know, harking back to the idea that, you know, social media is the first great AI intervention. So we have some sense of how this works in building tacit things, tacit ways of doing. And I just wondered if you had any reflection on where we were thus far. You know, because there's one thing to be frightened of something that's coming, and there's another thing to be frightened of something in practice. And I just would like to hear your observations.
Well, social media is a really fascinating example, because we have been doing this cognitive offloading into this social sphere for quite a few years now, and we've been getting these abbreviated. Tim and I have been talking about this notion of low resolution cognition, where what you do is you take chunks of other thoughts and you put them together, and that's kind of how we think generally. But what we're doing is avoiding the finer resolution cognition, where we're actually having to think about what those things are. So I don't see the generative AI stuff as being particularly a revolution. I see it as an evolution of what we have been doing for really quite a long time. And I think that it's something which has been, we've had, it really, I mean, it kind of goes back to Newton and the moment when we started seeing the world in from an objectivist perspective, and that became a useful way of seeing a reductivist perspective. Pulling things apart seemed like a good way of seeing the world. I think most of us are here talking about putting things back together. About celebrating the complexity of the universe and our places within it and our relationships within it, and trying to understand some of the shapes that happen in it, but not trying to control all of those shapes. And that's I think this is kind of where we ought to be heading, and it's about reevaluating. It's going back to values and this speaks back to the indigenous values and the things. It's about, you know, what is it that actually matters about what we're doing? And, you know, why are we learning this stuff? Why are we creating this stuff? We are in a situation where if we follow within formal education the patterns that we have been following, we'll just have robot teachers teaching robot students and skip the middleman, and we'll go and do something more interesting instead. That doesn't really seem to be like a great plan. And so I think reclaiming those values that really existed through most of, and they've always been there in education because they've always come for free. You know, whenever you teach somebody something, you're not just teaching them the explicit curriculum. The tacit curriculum is coming through too. And when it was always humans doing that, I mean, we didn't have to think about it. Now we do, because something else can do that. And that is quite exciting and terrifying.
We have another question from Rupert.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, just following on from Simon's point, you draw a contrast there between education as learning how to use tools and education as tacit values, as if these are only human. So you're saying, but isn't there a bit of an issue here? You mentioned oral societies. So there's a lot of wisdom that's been going on for thousands of years. I talked about Socrates, you know, I read a lot of anthropology, get a lot of wisdom in small groups, but almost invariably they call themselves the people, and there's constant warfare between these different groups. In other words, the kind of naturally occurring technology of language promotes face-to-face groups. I believe Robin Dunbar suggests about 150 can work and you can have a sense of identity. But if we actually want to create a human identity, a global consciousness of the future whereby we're not in constant warfare as we have been throughout the whole of human history, surely you're going to have need some technologically mediated, some social media, some AI personifications that can enable and facilitate a new kind of tacit and embodied becoming.
Yes, of course, and that's wonderful. I mean, I'm an uber geek. I love this stuff. I love the fact that I am so extended into the world and into other people as a result of these technologies, and I'm a very enthusiastic generative AI user myself. What I think we need to be what I'm making a plea for is that we do it mindfully, with awareness of the Faustian bargains that, you know, to use Postman's term, that we're engaging in when we do this. And the Faustian bargain, and it's really also a plea to change education, because I think that, you know, we have moved towards such a culture of measurement of things that are easily measured, that it makes it very hard that we've forgotten the other things that go along with it. And I mean, yes, I would love to have this changed global culture where we are part of many collectives of collectives of collectives of collectives. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Deciding or thinking about or constantly redeciding and reinventing what we find to be the things that matter, I think, is something that we kind of need to do. There is a discontinuity at this point where we run the risk of losing that. Yeah, I mean, the past was crap. You know, I mean, the past was rubbish. On the whole, I think we manage better today than we've ever managed in the past. But we shouldn't lose what was good about the past.
Can we just give Michael the last question?
Well, Anna, I want to really try and keep us to time, so I'm going to ask Mike.
Yeah, no question, Michael. Sorry. You can keep it for the reflections.
You're too nice, Anna. Mike, I ask you to hold that thought for the plenary reflection session. So let's just thank Jon again for that. Very provocative. And let's move on to two Aussies down here with me. Tim Fawns first from Monash University.